T'Challa the Black Panther in Cables from Hala Chapter 1. The planetary force field of Hala, the home world of the Kree Empire. T'Challa walked on the force field with the mechanized boots that he had made. He looked down at the cloud formations beneath him that were in the north pole of the planet. He chose the location to avoid civilian collateral damage in the metropolitan areas further south because he expected a battle with Hala's sentry robots after he breached the force field. The Black Panther rested 4 discs in a circular pattern around him and then he activated them, the devices connected with the built-in seam that was in the force field, which allowed the Kree to partially open the force field to allow vessels through it. T'Challa dropped through the opening that was made and he told his teleportation computers to take him to the Kree capital, but they told him that teleportation barriers were up all over the planet. "Okay," said T'Challa. His hyper-senses did not detect any of the sentries, which was unusual for the militarized society. T'Challa had anticipated a high degree of internal security from a planet that had had its share of invasions. "Maybe they placed all their efforts into the force field," said T'Challa, but doubted it. Diplomatic cables from Wakanda's emissary on Hala painted a picture of major economic plans to enhance the Kree's galactic empire against its rivals the Shi'ar Empire. Then the cables ceased from the emissary and checks by Wakanda's space fleet came upon the force field around Hala. Further inquiries with colonies in the Kree Empire unearthed that no explanation was given for the security measure and it was assumed that it was a mock military exercise. T'Challa knocked his heels together and a hoverboard was created by the nano-robots that came out of the boots. The rest of his spacesuit broke apart and formed a floating shield around him. He flew down to a glacier on the North Pole. The Black Panther ceremonial suit that he wore insulated him from the climate. The supercomputer infused in the mask connected to the Kree's online network. Then T'Challa scanned for the artificial intelligence that governed the Empire. A hologram of the artificial intelligence appeared before him. Its tentacles moved slowly on both sides of its head while its 6 eyes looked over the Black Panther. "Where is my emissary?" asked T'Challa. "In quarantine," replied the Supreme Intelligence. "Then why didn't you notify me about it before?" "Messages of this nature are too sensitive to be sent through normal channels. The Kree cannot be stigmatized with a viral outbreak, it will hurt our competitiveness with the other empires and assist our enemies," replied the Supreme Intelligence. "What is the nature of this virus?" "The techno-organic virus affects both flesh and mechanical Kree. We traced it back to your emissary but cannot determine how it was transmitted in the population." "How many are infected?" "Half the planet. It happened over 3 days." "If you cannot determine how it was transmitted, then how did you pin it on my citizen?" "Because she is emitting a peculiar bio-wave," replied the Supreme Intelligence. "Let me see her," said T'Challa. "No. There is a risk that the virus will get into the data stream that I am using." "Then have it your way," said T'Challa. He fired up the hoverboard's anti-gravity plates and flew southward while he ignored the protests from the Supreme Intelligence. "You risk infection of yourself," shouted the Supreme Intelligence. Chapter 2. T'Challa used his soul tracking sense to locate his citizen in the zombie-like metropolis of the Hala seat of power. The sentries were probably infected with the virus because they were not on the streets. As for the populace, they were indoors asleep. T'Challa smelt the traces of a gas that had a sleeping agent in the city. As for the virus, T'Challa calculated that the heart-shaped herb properties in his DNA would provide a sliver of protection for the time being. "You are overstepping your bounds and infringing on Kree medical protocols," said the Supreme Intelligence. "Isn't Wakanda known for medical care?" asked T'Challa. "On Earth, but not out here with so many species," replied the Supreme Intelligence. "Furthermore, you are not a medical expert." "But I am an expert on biofrequencies because one of my enemies based his existence on it," said T'Challa. "So kindly open a secure corridor to my citizen's medical room." T'Challa landed in front of the hospital that he tracked the emissary to, and then the closed doors suddenly opened. The Black Panther flew inside and he went into a 10-feet-wide medical bay. The emissary had been dissected and the body parts placed in cubes, but she was still alive. "Make her whole," said T'Challa in a calm tone which masked his disgust and rage. The cubes levitated and merged together to form a hexahedron. The Wakanda citizen's body was reconstituted into its proper form in the clear polyhedron which leaned slightly backwards. T'Challa touched the surface and reached out with his Black Panther hypersense for the soul, since it was linked to the vibrations of the body. "What have you found?" asked the Supreme Intelligence. "I need more time and silence to concentrate," replied T'Challa. The Black Panther discovered that the citizen's body did emit a pulse, but it was a trigger, not the source of the virus. "Tell me what became of the transmode virus that ravaged the cosmos years ago." "It was culled from the Kree gene pool. The Skrulls and Shi'ar did the same when the virus was stopped." "Culling means it was removed from the next generation of infants, not the adults that already had it," said T'Challa. "Maybe on Earth culls means that, but out here in the cosmos it means something else." T'Challa looked at the Supreme Intelligence. "You would have done the same thing to save Wakanda," said the Supreme Intelligence. "Wakanda was militaristic, but not to the extent of the Cosmos empires, so the mass killing of Wakandans and replacing them with clones would never be considered." T'Challa got the thought out of his mind and concentrated on the biofrequency again. He had to find out why the dark wave was in there in the first place. Suddenly the hologram of the Supreme Intelligence flickered. "I warned that I could become corrupted by coming by here," said the artificial intelligence. "Leave before it's too late," said T'Challa. Once the hologram disappeared, the Black Panther broke out the citizen with a spear of light that he formed with his hand. Then he gave her his spacesuit and hoverboard. He programmed a message onto the spacesuit's recorder for the Wakanda warship next to the planet to find. The hoverboard would take the emissary through the hole in the planetary force field to the warship. Then T'Challa went to the home of the emissary to piece together what had happened to her. Chapter 3. The reason that T'Challa asked about the transmode virus was because it was similar to the techno-organic virus, and he assumed that traces of the transmode virus was still in the population, but that was not so. Therefore the Black Panther had to dig deeper into his investigation. He knew where the emissary stayed in Hala because of her dispatches. Due to the shutdown of the city's machines, the elevators in the skyscraper that the emissary lived in were not working, which forced the Black Panther to climb the 2,000 floors building with the claws from his gloves. It took him 3 hours to reach the apartment. When he opened the window, a great deal of sleeping gas came out of it. He filtered the air through his mask and entered. By protocol, the emissary was to place diplomatic cable notes in a tiny pocket dimension in the west side of the abode. T'Challa unlocked the hiding place and pulled out the data storage device, then he jacked into it. He scanned the archives for the last year, even though he would have read them when he had received them on Earth, but obviously he missed something very important. He eventually found a dispatch that did not trouble him before. It dealt with the cancellation of a public health convention for the Kree Empire called Event 201 that was rescheduled for the next solar cycle due to a military incident on the fringe of the Empire. T'Challa went through the names of the expected attendees and he stumbled upon Minerva. She was supposed to be imprisoned based on Wakanda's records on Kree who had attacked Earth. Minerva was supposed to stay at the Science Council, so T'Challa went over there. The computers were in lock stasis, but he tore through the hard drives in the server pods. His universal translator allowed him to read the databanks, and he found that Minerva was never imprisoned, but the pretense was cultivated to appease the Earth. "Most likely with the blessing of the Supreme Intelligence," said T'Challa. Minerva was on Hala for several days before the Event 201, and after the postponement she left for her home planet Kreelar, which was once the political center of the Kree Empire. "Interesting," said T'Challa. The Black Panther speculated that his emissary was used as a scapegoat to launch a bio-attack on Hala, and whoever did it needed to intimately know the public health protocols of the planet. Based on that hypothesis, Minerva was a major suspect for T'Challa. A credible reason for Minerva's supposed betrayal of the Empire was the part that undermined the theory. Then a slight glitch in the mask's optics signaled to him that the virus was trying to enter his system. Chapter 4 Hala was physically destroyed at one point in time and reconstructed. During the reconstruction, Wakanda took the opportunity to indirectly assist the process with proxy alien races and secretly placed mini spaceships on the planet. T'Challa took a few days to get to the east of the planet and he unearthed one of the mini spaceships. It was a one-seat vessel with a side engine attached to the pilot pod. During the time it took for T'Challa to reach the vessel, the planetary shield had slowly deteriorated and scout spaceships frequently passed over T'Challa, but he cloaked himself from them. He guessed that the ships were Kree and spies. The virus was slowly creeping through his system, so he did not want to infect any others, and he did not know the degree of infection on the people on those ships. More importantly, someone might get into the hospital records and find out that a human was labeled as Patient Zero, which would start a rumor in the cosmos. T'Challa got into the vessel and left to find Minerva. Next story, Event 201.